The wind never left the plains. It whistled through broken fences, rattled the shutters of a weathered ranch house, and carried the dry taste of dust and time. This was Samuel Gray's world, a world that had long since forgotten him, just as he had tried and failed to forget it. Once his laughter had carried across campfires and open ranges. He had been a cowboy with friends, a drifter with stories, and a fighter with scars to prove he had lived. But now, at 56, the world had moved on, while he remained trapped in yesterday's ruins. His ranch stood at the edge of New Mexico territory, where desert met forest. The land was too dry for farming, too far from town for company, and too heavy with memory for peace. The cattle that remained were as stubborn and worn as their master. Samuel spent his days fixing fences that would only break again, patching roofs that storms would soon tear apart, and staring at sunsets that reminded him of everything he had lost. His family was gone. His brother had fallen in a border skirmish. His father's land had withered into debt and drought, and the woman he had once loved had chosen another. Samuel lived on with nothing but empty nights and the echo of what if. Still, he endured. Some men fought wars, some fought each other, but Samuel fought time. And though time was cruel, it had never quite broken him. Most evenings, after tending the herd, he sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching stars scatter across the black sky. Coyotes sang from the hills, and sometimes he thought he could hear distant Apache drums drifting on the wind. He bore the tribes no hatred. If anything, he respected them. They were fighters, same as him, but respect could not fill the silence. His beard had gone gray, his hands were cracked from years of labor, and his voice, when he bothered to speak, was rough with disuse. He knew the townsfolk called him the forgotten rancher, a relic of the old days. Few ever visited, and when they did, it was only for business. Nobody cared to ask about his stories anymore. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Samuel saddled his horse, Dusty, and rode out to the far pasture. The air carried winter's bite, and stars began to glimmer in the violet sky. A lantern swung from the saddle, throwing jagged shadows across the earth. The night was quiet to quiet. Even the coyotes had hushed. Samuel slowed his horse and listened. Then he heard it, faint but clear, a sound carried on the wind. Not the howl of a wolf, not the lowing of cattle, something else. A child. At first he thought his mind was tricking him, but then it came again, a sharp, desperate cry that cut through the silence like a knife. Samuel straightened in his saddle, his pulse quickening. Children didn't belong out here, not in the wild, not at night. He spurred Dusty forward, lanterns swinging as they thundered across the hills. The cry grew louder, more frantic. With every stride, Samuel's thoughts raced. A settler's child, an Apache youth, lost, injured. This land was merciless rattlesnakes, bandits, and, worst of all, the hungry wolf packs that prowled the dark. That sound stirred something inside him he thought had long since died: purpose. For years he had lived like a ghost, but now, as the cry pierced the night once more, Samuel knew one thing with absolute certainty: someone out there needed him. He tightened his grip on the rifle. Whatever lay beyond the next ridge, he would face it, not to be remembered, but because it was the only thing left worth doing. And under the rising moon, the forgotten rancher rode toward the unknown, unaware that this night would shape his destiny forever. The night pressed down on the land like a heavy blanket. The moon had risen pale and thin, draping the desert in silver light. Samuel urged Dusty onward, the old horse's hooves pounding the hard ground, lantern swinging wildly at his side. Each gust of wind carried that same sound, sharp, broken, human. A child's wail, ragged with fear. Samuel's jaw tightened. It had been years since he had heard anything so raw, so desperate. He leaned forward in the saddle, whispering low to his horse, "Steady now, boy. We'll find them." The scream rose again, closer this time. It echoed off the hills, twisting the silence into something fierce and unsettling. Samuel slowed his horse and lifted the lantern high, casting light across jagged rocks and shifting shadows. His rifle rested across his lap, ready. Out here, hesitation could mean death for him or for whoever cried in the dark. The air smelled of pine and cold earth. Beyond the ridges, the forest loomed, a dark sea of twisted trunks and whispering branches. The sound drew him toward that thicket. Samuel swallowed. The woods at night were no place for a child. Dusty snorted uneasily, ears twitching at something unseen. Then Samuel heard it, another sound beneath the wail, low, guttural, a growl. Wolves. He tightened his grip on the rifle. The pieces fell into place, the scream of a child, the unnatural hush of the plains, and now the predators closing in. Samuel's pulse quickened. He dug his heels into Dusty's sides, driving the horse forward into the trees. Branches clawed at his coat as he pushed through the underbrush. The lantern's glow caught fleeting shapes, roots, shadows that looked like crouching figures in the dark. Then, just beyond a clearing, he saw her, a young girl, no more than 12, her clothes torn, hair tangled, eyes wide with terror. She stood backed against a gnarled juniper tree, clutching a stick as if it could hold back death itself. Around her, yellow eyes gleamed, a pack of 6 wolves, lean with hunger, teeth flashing in the lantern light. They circled the girl, growls rolling like thunder. One stepped closer, lips peeled back, ready to strike. Samuel didn't think he acted. The rifle came to his shoulder, and with a crack that split the night, the first wolf dropped. The others recoiled, snarling, their eyes darting between prey and intruder. The girl gasped, but did not move. "Stay still," Samuel barked, his voice rough but commanding. The largest wolf lunged at him. Dusty reared, hooves slashing. Samuel fired again, the shot tearing through the beast midair. It collapsed in a tangle of fur and blood. The pack wavered. 2 darted forward, snapping at Dusty's legs, but Samuel swung the rifle like a club, smashing one across the skull. The crack of bone echoed as the beast yelped and stumbled away. The last 3 wolves snarled, but did not advance. Hunger warred with fear in their eyes. Samuel chambered another round and fired into the dirt, inches from their paws. The thunder of the shot and spray of dust broke their nerve. With sharp whines, the wolves turned and melted into the forest, their glowing eyes fading into the dark. For a long moment, silence returned, broken only by the girl's ragged breathing. Samuel lowered the rifle and dismounted, boots crunching on icy soil. He approached slowly, lantern raised. The girl pressed against the tree, chest heaving, stick still clutched in trembling hands. Her eyes locked on him, not with gratitude, but with suspicion. Fierce, unyielding suspicion. "It's all right," Samuel said softly, his voice steady despite the hammer of his heart. "They're gone. You're safe now." She didn't answer. She only stared, her gaze sharp as the edge of a knife. Samuel studied her closer. Her skin was bronzed from the sun, her dark hair braided with beads and feathers. Apache. The realization struck him. This was no settler's child. She was of the very people the ranchers feared, the very tribe many townsfolk spoke of with distrust. But to Samuel, in this moment, she was simply a child one who had nearly been torn apart by wolves. He extended a hand, careful, slow, respectful. The girl's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Instead, her eyes flicked from his face to his hand, then back again. For a heartbeat, the wilderness held them both, the forgotten rancher and the hunted child. Two lives crossing under the cold light of the moon, and though neither could know it yet, this night would bind them in ways neither could yet imagine. The clearing still smelled of smoke and gunpowder. The lantern's glow trembled across the ground, showing the lifeless bodies of two wolves sprawled in the dirt. Their fur was matted with blood, jaws still locked in snarls, even in death. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that comes only after violence. Samuel lowered his rifle, breathing hard. Dusty pawed at the ground, snorting as if to shake off the stench of the hunt. The horse had felt the danger too. Animals always did. Samuel reached out, steadying the reins with one calloused hand. "Easy now, boy. It's done." But it wasn't truly done. His eyes swept the tree line, wary. Wolves rarely gave up so easily. Even now, their shadows might be watching from the forest's edge, waiting for another chance. The girl had not moved from the base of the tree. Her eyes, black as obsidian, tracked his every step with suspicion. She looked like a wild thing herself, hair tangled with dirt, skin scratched from branches, clothes torn by claws. Yet, beneath the fear in her gaze, burned something stronger. Defiance. "You hurt?" Samuel asked gently. His voice, rough from years of disuse, carried a strange softness. No reply. She only gripped the stick tighter, as if it were a spear. He took a step closer. The girl flinched, shoulders stiff, but held her ground. Samuel respected that. Fear had not broken her. Before he could speak again, a sound carried across the clearing, a low, chilling note-a howl, long and mournful. Then another answered, deeper and closer. The wolves were not gone. They were gathering. Samuel cursed under his breath. His rifle had only a few rounds left, and the pack outnumbered him. He glanced at the girl. She would never survive another attack on foot. If she stayed, she was dead. If she ran, the wolves would cut her down. He made his decision. "You're coming with me," he said firmly. He pointed to Dusty, who stood stamping nervously in the shadows. "Horse'll carry us both. It's the only way." The girl didn't understand his words, not fully, but she understood his gesture. She shook her head violently, clutching the tree as though its roots could protect her. A third howl split the night, closer still. The pack was moving in. Samuel strode forward, ignoring the girl's protests. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, set the lantern on the ground, and crouched before her. His weathered face met her fierce eyes. "You trust me, or we both die," he said. For a heartbeat, the world held still. The girl's chest heaved with frantic breaths, her small frame trembling. Then, with a sharp intake of air, she released the stick and nodded once, quick and reluctant. Samuel wasted no time. He lifted her into his arms lighter than he expected. Bones and sinew wrapped in stubborn will. She stiffened at his touch, but did not resist. He carried her to Dusty, setting her gently in the saddle. The horse shifted, uneasy ears pinned back at the distant chorus of howls. Samuel mounted behind the girl, one arm steadying her, the other gripping the reins. He leaned low to Dusty's neck. Ride. The horse lunged forward, just as movement flickered at the tree line. More yellow eyes appeared in the darkness, dozens of them. The pack had returned, larger than before. They poured from the shadows like a tide of hunger, fangs flashing in the lantern light. Dusty bolted into the woods, hooves pounding the soil, breath steaming in the cold night air. The girl clutched the saddle horn with white knuckles, her braid whipping against Samuel's chest. Behind them, the wolves gave chase, their howls rising into a fevered chorus. Branches whipped across Samuel's coat, tearing at fabric and flesh. He fired a shot blindly over his shoulder. The crack echoed, and one wolf yelped, but the pack did not falter. Their shadows darted between trees, fast as smoke. Hold on. Samuel shouted over the thunder of hooves. The girl buried her face against his arm. But her grip was iron. She was no ordinary child. She clung to life like a warrior. The chase drove them deeper into the wilderness, where moonlight flickered through the canopy and the path narrowed to little more than a game trail. Samuel's heart hammered, but his mind was steady. He had fought men before, fought beasts, fought storms. He knew one thing above all: survival meant never stopping, never surrendering. The wolves' howls faded slightly as Dusty surged ahead, his strength carrying them farther than Samuel dared hope. At last, after what felt like an eternity, the clearing gave way to open ground. The wolves held back at the tree line, growling but unwilling to follow into the open plain. Samuel slowed the horse, chest heaving, sweat chilling on his brow. The girl raised her head, eyes wide with shock and wonder. For the first time, her gaze softened not with trust, but with the fragile spark of possibility. The circle had broken. For now. But Samuel knew the fight wasn't over. Not with the wolves, not with the land, and not with fate itself. The plain stretched wide beneath the cold stars, a silver sea of grass bending in the wind. Dusty slowed his gallop, foam lacing his mouth, sides heaving with effort. Samuel eased the reins, letting the horse breathe, while his own chest rose and fell like a blacksmith's bellows. The girl was still pressed against him, clutching the saddle horn. Her breaths came in sharp gasps, but her eyes, those fierce, obsidian eyes, stayed open. Fear had not broken her. Instead, she turned to scan the horizon, as if already searching for danger. Samuel found himself admiring her spirit. "Reckon we're safe for now," he muttered, though his words were more to steady her than himself. He knew better. Wolves did not forget. Packs hunted with patience, with hunger that could last through nights and miles. Dusty staggered, nearly stumbling, and Samuel dismounted quickly. He pulled the girl down with him, steadying her as her bare feet touched the frozen earth. She flinched, but did not pull away this time. Progress, however small. The old rancher patted Dusty's neck. "You did good, boy. Real good." The horse snorted, ears twitching, then dropped his head to breathe deep. Samuel's gaze turned to the girl. She couldn't be more than 10 years old, though her eyes carried the weight of lifetimes. Her dress, once white, was ragged and soaked with blood. Some hers, most not. You hurt anywhere? Samuel asked again. This time she raised her arm, showing where claws had torn deep. The wound was raw, crimson against her skin. Samuel's jaw tightened. Infection could kill quicker than wolves. Hold still, he said. He tore a strip from his own shirt, hands steady, though his heart raced. He wrapped the cloth firm around her arm. She winced, but did not cry out. Brave little thing. When he finished, she studied the bandage, then studied him, as though weighing the truth of his actions. For the first time, her shoulders eased. A fraction of trust had been earned. A sound broke the fragile moment. Rustling, deliberate, too heavy for wind. Samuel spun, rifle raised. The girl tensed, clutching his arm. But it wasn't wolves. From the darkness emerged 3 riders, their silhouettes black against the moonlit horizon. Horses snorted, hooves thudding soft against the grass. The lead rider lifted a lantern high, its glow cutting through the night. A voice called Dot. Samuel narrowed his eyes. He hadn't heard that name spoken in years. Depends who's askin'. The riders came closer, faces hard under wide-brimmed hats. They wore dust-stained coats and carried rifles slung across their saddles. Townsfolk, by the look, but not ones he trusted. We heard shots, the leader said, eyes flicking to the girl at Samuel's side. Heard, tell wolves been prowlin' these parts. What's this you got here? Samuel stepped in front of her, shielding her small frame with his broad shoulders. Found her in the woods. Wolves had her cornered. The men exchanged glances. One spat in the dirt. Apache, ain't she? The word carried weight, heavy with prejudice. Samuel's grip on his rifle tightened. She's a child. That's all that matters. The riders shifted uneasily. Town won't see it that way. They'll want her gone. Samuel felt the girl's fingers dig into his coat. She didn't understand the words, but she understood tone. Fear returned to her, eyes not of wolves, but of men. Then town don't need to know, Samuel said coldly. For a long moment, the prairie held its breath. Then the leader gave a slow nod. Do what you will, Brooks. But wolves ain't the only danger out here. With that, the riders turned, lanterns swaying, and vanished into the dark. Silence fell again. The girl looked up at Samuel, her small face lit by the fading glow. In her gaze, he saw both fear and something more hope. He crouched down, meeting her eyes level. Don't you worry, little one. I'll see you safe. That's a promise. The words surprised even him. Samuel Brooks was a man who had long since given up promises. Yet here, beneath the endless sky, with a child who had no one else, he spoke them as truth. Above them, the moon drifted west. The night was far from over. Wolves prowled in the distance, and somewhere beyond the horizon, men carried judgments as sharp as knives. But Samuel had chosen his path, and for the first time in years, he felt it mattered. The prairie night grew colder, the kind of cold that bit through coats and into bones. Samuel knew they couldn't stay in the open. Wolves hunted best when darkness was deepest. Fire, though, fire would hold them back. He gathered dry brush, his hands practiced and steady, while the girl sat near Dusty, her eyes never leaving him. She watched with the quiet intensity of someone who had learned survival the hard way. When Samuel struck flint to steel, sparks leaped into the nest of grass and twigs. Soon flames licked upward, crackling bright against the endless dark. The girl crept closer, warmth painting her face in orange light. Her lips trembled, not from fear, but from the relief fire always brings. Samuel noticed the way her eyes reflected the flames alive, searching, unbroken. He handed her a strip of jerky from his saddlebag. She sniffed it first, suspicious, then tore into it with small, hungry bites. Samuel smirked faintly. Figured as much. Wolves ain't the only ones with an appetite. She glanced up at him then, chewing. For the first time, her gaze softened, just slightly. Trust was a slow fire writ needed tending, just like the one between them. Samuel leaned back against a log, letting the warmth seep into his worn muscles. He studied her carefully. Everything about her told a story. The paint faintly smeared on her cheek, the necklace of bone beads half hidden beneath her dress, the way she sat alert even when exhausted. She belonged to the Apache, proud and fierce, and yet here she was lost, hunted, clinging to life, the silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of fire. Samuel cleared his throat. Name's Samuel Brooks. Folks just call me Brooks. The girl tilted her head, as if trying to understand. Then, slowly, she touched her chest. Naya, she said softly. The word carried strength, despite her small voice. Samuel nodded. Naya, good name. She repeated his name in return, stumbling over the sounds, Samel, before giving up with a frown. He chuckled, low. Close enough. For a time they shared the fire without words. Samuel found himself remembering nights long gone, his own children, now buried beneath markers on a wind-swept hill. He remembered how laughter once filled the air around a campfire. He hadn't let himself think of that in years. Tonight he did. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound Samuel knew too well. A howl, distant, but not far enough. Naya froze, eyes darting to him. Easy, Samuel said, loading his rifle with calm, deliberate motions. Fire'll keep M back. The wolves circled at the edge of hearing, their voices weaving a chorus that raised the hairs on Samuel's neck. He threw another branch on the fire, the flames snapping higher. They'll wait, but so will we. Naya moved closer to him, her small frame pressing against his side. For a moment, Samuel hesitated, then placed a protective arm around her shoulders. She did not pull away. The bond, fragile as it was, had begun to take root. The hours crawled. Samuel dozed lightly, rifle across his lap, while Naya slept, curled beside him. Twice, glowing eyes appeared at the circle of firelight, watching. Twice, Samuel lifted his rifle, and the eyes slipped back into the dark, just before dawn. When the sky was bruised with the first hint of light, the wolves melted away. The prairie grew still. Samuel stirred the dying embers, then stood, stretching stiff muscles. Dusty whickered softly, ears flicking at the morning breeze. He looked down at Naya. She stirred, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and for the first time she smiled, a small, fleeting thing, but real. Samuel felt something stir in him too, something he thought long dead, purpose. He tightened the strap on his rifle and offered her his hand. Come on, Naja. World ain't getting any safer while we sit. She slipped her hand into his, small, fragile, but strong in spirit. Together they turned east, toward the rising sun. The bond was no longer just firelight and fear. It was something stronger, something that would carry them both into the trials yet to come. By the time Samuel and Naya reached Dry Creek, the sun was high, beating down on the dusty road that wound into town. The place looked as tired as Samuel felt. Weathered wooden buildings leaned like old men, their paint long since stripped by sun and sand. The saloon's sign squeaked in the wind, and the blacksmith's forge stood silent. Even the church bell hung crooked, rust gnawing at its edges. Naya gripped Dusty's mane as they rode down the main street. Her eyes darted everywhere, windows, alleys, shadows. Samuel couldn't blame her. Dry Creek wasn't the kind of place that welcomed strangers, especially not Apache children. Samuel dismounted slowly, helping Naya down. The street was quiet, too quiet. A few townsfolk lingered on porches or behind dusty windows, watching. Their eyes followed the girl like wolves in daylight, suspicion sharp as a knife. Samuel tipped his hat. Morning. No reply came. Only the scrape of a chair leg, the faint creak of a shutter. The weight of silence pressed down heavy. He led Dusty toward the general store. Best get you some food and bandages, he muttered to Naya. She stayed close, half hidden in his shadow. Inside, the store smelled of flour, tobacco, and stale whiskey. The keeper, a thin man with a permanent scowl, looked up from the counter. His gaze landed on Naya, and his jaw tightened. "What's this, Brooks?" he asked flatly. "A child," Samuel said, his tone even. "Needs food. Needs medicine." The man snorted. "That ain't no child. That's Apache." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a sneer. "You know what her kind done? Raids, burned homesteads, took lives." Samuel's hand hovered near his belt buckle, close enough to his holster to make a point. His voice dropped low. "She's hurt. She's hungry. That's all you need to know." The storekeeper hesitated, then shoved a sack across the counter. "Ain't my place to argue with a fool," he muttered. Naya tugged at Samuel's coat, whispering in her tongue. He couldn't understand the words, but he understood the fear. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, steadying her as they stepped back onto the street. Local ranch hands, rough from sun and saddle, eyes hard as flint. Their leader spat into the dust. "Brooks," he drawled. "Word is, you've been keepin' strange company." His gaze flicked to Naya. "That true?" Samuel squared his shoulders. "She's under my care." The man's smirk widened. "Ain't wise, talkin' in one of them. Folks might think you forgot where your loyalties lie." Samuel's hand itched for his rifle, but he kept it steady at his side. "Folks can think what they want. She's a child, and I won't stand by while men act less than wolves." A tense silence followed. Then the ranch hand stepped aside, though his eyes promised trouble later. Samuel guided Naya past, his jaw clenched. They made their way to the livery, where Samuel paid for a stall and fresh water for Dusty. Naya stroked the horse's muzzle, whispering something soft. For the first time, her face relaxed, a faint smile breaking through the fear. Samuel felt his chest ease just a little, but the quiet didn't last. As the sun began to sink, a church bell rang, slow and deliberate. Samuel looked toward the square, where townsfolk were gathering. Something in the air shifted suspicion, sharpening into judgment. He knew then that the silence of Dry Creek had only been the calm before the storm. and the storm was coming fast. The church bell's echo still hung in the air when Samuel led Naya into the square. The townsfolk of Dry Creek had gathered, men with rifles leaning against their boots, women with folded arms, children peering from behind skirts. Their faces were carved from stone, suspicion written in every line. Samuel felt their stares like bullets. He'd known this town for 20 years, fought side by side with some of these men in cattle wars and border feuds. But now, standing with an Apache girl at his side, he was a stranger in their eyes. The preacher stepped forward, black coat swaying, Bible clutched in his hands. His voice boomed with practiced fire. "Brothers and sisters, this man brings among us a child of the Apache. You know what that means? Blood has been spilled by their kind, our blood. Homesteads burned, families torn apart. Shall we welcome this threat into our midst?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, swelling like storm clouds. Naya shrank behind Samuel, clutching his coat. Her eyes darted from face to face, seeing nothing but hate. Samuel's hand rested gently on her shoulder. He stepped forward, his voice gravelly but steady. "She's a child, lost, hurt. I found her near torn to pieces by wolves. You call yourselves Christians, then act like it. You damn a little girl for sins she never committed." The preacher's lips thinned. "You know as well as I, Brooks, the Apache are raised to hate us. She may be small now, but one day she'll grow, and her loyalty will not be to us. You gamble with our lives." One of the ranch hands from earlier shouted, "He's already picked his side." The crowd roared agreement. Samuel stood his ground, his eyes burning beneath his weathered hat brim. "My side's the side of decency. You talk about loyalty. Where was yours when men let wolves circle a child? Where's your honor now?" The words cut deeper than bullets. Silence followed, heavy and uneasy. Some townsfolk looked away, shame flickering in their eyes. Others glared harder, unwilling to bend. The preacher raised his hands. "Enough. Let us vote. Do we cast her out, or do we take her in?" A hand shot up, then another. Soon the square was filled with raised arms, most against the girl. Naya's fingers dug into Samuel's coat, her breath ragged with panic. Samuel's jaw clenched. He saw where this was heading. Before the preacher could declare judgment, the howl of wolves shattered the night. Low and haunting, it rolled across the plains like a curse. Every head snapped toward the horizon. From the dark hills came movement, shadows flowing like water. Dozens of wolves, their eyes glowing like embers, racing straight for Dry Creek. Chaos erupted. Women screamed. Men grabbed rifles. Children fled into doorways. The pack had followed Samuel and Naya all the way from the forest, hunger driving them into the heart of town. Samuel raised his rifle, voice sharp. "Form a line. Get to the barricades." The townsfolk hesitated. Then instinct took over. Men scrambled into defensive positions, firing as the first wolves broke through the outer street. Gunfire cracked, smoke rising, but the pack did not falter. Samuel pushed Naya behind a barrel. "Stay down, Naya." He fired shot after shot, each one dropping a beast inches from the townsfolk. Wolves leaped at men, teeth flashing, claws raking. Horses screamed, rearing in terror. The preacher, Bible forgotten, grabbed a rifle and fought beside them. The townsfolk, who minutes before had condemned the girl now found themselves shoulder to shoulder with Samuel, fighting for their lives. Amid the chaos, Naya refused to hide. She snatched a burning brand from a fire pit, waving it at the wolves that drew too close. Her defiance sparked something in the people who saw her not an enemy, not a threat, but a fighter standing with them. By the time dawn touched the horizon, the square was littered with bodies, wolves and men alike. The survivors stood, bloodied, exhausted, but alive. Samuel lowered his rifle, chest heaving. He looked around at the faces of Dry Creek, faces no longer carved from stone, but softened by what they'd endured together. The preacher, breathing hard, turned to the crowd. This child fought with us, bled with us. Perhaps the Lord sent her, not as a curse, but as a test. The murmurs now were different, hesitant, thoughtful. Naya leaned against Samuel, her small frame trembling with exhaustion. Samuel looked down at her, then back at the townsfolk. "You wanted a trial by fire," he said. "Well, we just had one." And she stood taller than most grown men here. Silence lingered, but it was no longer hostile. Something had shifted, fragile but real. For the first time, Samuel dared to believe that Dry Creek might not turn them both away. The wolves were gone. Their bodies lay scattered across Dry Creek's dusty street, the smell of blood sharp in the rising dawn. Smoke drifted from broken lanterns, and townsfolk moved among the fallen, tending wounds and gathering their dead. Samuel leaned against a post, rifle hanging limp in his hand. Every bone in his body ached, but his eyes stayed fixed on Naya. The girl stood tall, despite exhaustion. The torch she had wielded, now only a charred stick. She looked smaller than the fight she had given, but the fire in her eyes made her seem larger than life. The townsfolk saw it too. Whispers spread through the square, admiration, disbelief, shame. The same people who had voted to cast her out now watched her with something close to reverence. The preacher approached Samuel, his coat torn, blood seeping through his sleeve. He cleared his throat. "Brooks, maybe we were wrong. The girl saved lives here. She earned a place." Samuel looked down at Naya. She clung to his coat, her small hand gripping tight. He nodded once. She earned more than that. She earned respect. Before the preacher could reply, a new sound carried across the plains, a deep, rolling drumbeat, steady as a heartbeat. Then came voices, chanting low and powerful. Moving closer, from the ridge above Dry Creek, riders appeared, warriors Apache. Their horses crested the rise, spears glinting in the early sun, feathers snapping in the wind. At their head rode a figure draped in eagle feathers and painted with the red of leadership. The townsfolk tensed, rifles lifting again. Samuel stepped forward, raising his hand. "Hold your fire. They ain't here for blood." The Apache chief dismounted, his presence commanding, his eyes sharp. He spoke words Samuel did not understand, but Naya did. She stepped out from behind Samuel, her small frame trembling with awe. The chief's voice softened when he spoke to her. He touched her face gently, as though confirming she was real. Then he turned his gaze on Samuel. The weight of that stare was heavier than any rifle barrel. One of the warriors translated, "You saved the chief's daughter. She was lost in the hunt. Wolves would have taken her, but you fought. You kept her safe." Gasps rippled through the townsfolk. The preacher lowered his rifle, stunned. Samuel blinked, looking at Nino. Not just Naya, a child of bloodlines older than this town, of a people proud and fierce. The chief spoke again, his tone carrying honor. She is alive because of you. For this you have the gratitude of my people. Naya looked between Samuel and the chief, then back again. Slowly, she walked to Samuel, slipping her hand into his. The gesture was small, but the meaning was clear. The chief nodded. He spoke to his daughter in words Samuel could not follow. She listened, then stepped forward, her chin lifted high. Her voice rang clear, strong despite her youth. My place is here. For now. The words were halting, English twisted by accent, but they carried power. Samuel's throat tightened. She had chosen. The chief studied her, then Samuel. Finally, he placed a hand over his heart and bowed his head. The warriors followed his lead, their respect undeniable. Then they turned and rode back across the ridge, their chants fading into the morning. Dry Creek was silent again. But this silence was not suspicion, it was awe. The preacher spoke softly. Brooks, you didn't just save a child. You saved us too. Samuel shook his head. No, she saved herself. She saved all of us. He looked down at no longer just a frightened child by a fire, but something greater. A survivor. A leader in the making. He saw in her the steel of the wolves, the fire of the Apache, the courage of someone who would one day command more than just respect. 15 years later, Samuel Brooks would be long gone, buried beneath the same hills where his children slept. But the story of that night, of the girl who stood against wolves and men alike, would live on, and Naya would return not as a child, not as a survivor, but as a chief who carried both fire and mercy in her heart. The forgotten rancher had saved a girl. The girl had saved a town. And together they had forged a bond the world would never forget.